Hey there. Is this working? Cool. Before I start, I just want to say thanks to js.la for organizing this. I mean, these events are tremendous, and there's a lot of work that goes into organizing an event like this. Can we get a round of applause for js.la in general? And actually, I want to say a thanks to Google as well. This is a tremendous venue. With a venue like this, usually the tickets sell out really quickly. And that's because they have a lot of pull here at Google. Of course, the speakers do have a pull as well. But I'm also sorry to let you know that Faraz isn't going to be speaking tonight. But yeah, I'm here to talk to you today about something that a lot of people have been wondering about lately. And that's how not to burn yourself out. Sometimes there's some large expectations that is put on us as engineers that kind of push us to like a mental edge, whether we're supposed to be deity-like engineers that are 10x engineers, or we need to learn how to do algebraic expressions before the next meeting. But sometimes it's hard to balance on that edge. So my name is Jacob Lowe. I'm JCBLW across the web. And I wrote a talk about this because I got burnt out. I got burnt out multiple times before, but just recently got burnt out. And I'm kind of on a sabbatical right now, which has actually been kind of great because it allows me to think about these types of things. And I also used to work at a company called Headspace, which it's supposed to help with, well, it does help with things like stress and burnout and whatnot. But things have been kind of weird lately, so, so burnout, just in case, y'all haven't experienced it or really know what it is, it's just to ruin your health. And this is mostly done through overwork, just overworking yourself. And mental health is super important. And there's a lot of things you can do to, help your mental health. And if you could take a little bit of time during each day to, support your mental health, I would do it. It's totally worth it. And I want to say that, there's this stigma around, mental health being, mental health issues like burnout or anxiety or depression, being people that are weak. It's definitely not that. I have to say, I've accomplished some things in my life that I feel like I had to be pretty disciplined about. And I still run into things like burnout, and I still run into things like anxiety and depression. So I don't know if you guys get the luxury to work at a company that has these things called no meetings blocks, but they're actually fantastic. And if you don't work at a company, after listening to this talk, you should probably ask for no meetings blocks. But this is actually a fantastic time to kind of just reset. And it's not implicitly say take a break time, right? It's kind of supposed to be uninterrupted work time. But I definitely took advantage of these times at my prior job to actually take breaks and to kind of in the latter half of the no meetings blocks to be able to get my work done. And I would even on my breaks, I would actually invite even my coworkers to come with me. I'm I'm gonna go walk around the block. You wanna come hang out and just talk? Or, hey, would you, spend a couple minutes with me in a meditation session? But I did find out that a lot of my coworkers didn't actually view these no meetings blocks in the same way. A lot of times they viewed it as, this is a time for me to get ahead, to catch up. I can, get some work done. I can shove in a couple, extra lines of code during this time because it's uninterrupted work time. So I'm just gonna push through something. And as a manager, that does sound appealing. More work is more time. More time is more work. And I can actually see tickets moving and whatnot, check boxes. But what I found out is that that's not actually the case. That's not the reality of it. And it really was more more time does not equal better work. A lot of stuff that got pushed through when people were stressed out and they weren't taking breaks, things had bugs in it. It wasn't a good product. There was corners cut, in a lot of places. And it's more or less I don't want to push them to be oh, well, you got to fix this little thing here. you got to make a better product or whatever, especially when I know I'm dealing with somebody who's going through something that, they're feeling burnt out or whatnot. Now, I put in here meaningful breaks, because your body wants meaningful breaks. Now, going and getting a snack or a coffee, I think, a lot of us will associate that with a break, which actually it is. But, doing something like viewing nature, doing meditation, some type of mindfulness practice actually has been shown to be more effective in sustained attention than just doing other things like getting a snack or a coffee. And one of the reasons why you should take a break is that your brain is actually really good at automating things. And it's a good thing too, because I'm not constantly thinking about breathing. I'm just doing it. It helps me survive, my body automating things. But it kind of can get us into these weird loops of thought to where we stop thinking about problems in the same way. And whenever new variables get inserted into the problem, it's very hard for that loop to actually be able to handle those new variables. And that loop itself is a little thing called flow. And flow can be great. It actually is often romanticized in our industry. It's often, associated with things like creativity, productivity. People even will rearrange their schedules around flow. I want to make sure all my meetings are at the end of the day so I can have this unfederated block in the middle of the day that I can just get into the flow and stay in the flow. But flow is actually kind of a weird thing, because it can also cause some pretty crazy human behaviors. Casinos actually will utilize flow to be able to keep people in the seats of a machine, which they actually use the term time on device, which was actually coined a long time ago, right before iPhones were a thing. And, we have to ask ourselves sometimes, is this the best life that we're living when we're getting into these flows and we're doing all this stuff? When I'm, there's been many times where I will kind of get into a really good flow, and then I'll kind of run off to the bathroom at the last moment because I'm like, oh, I forgot to go to the bathroom. I need to go real quick, and then I can jump back to programming. And that's not, healthy if I'm starting to neglect my body functions just because I'm like, I want to write one more line of code. There was a study, and they find that people actually will sometimes hold their breath when checking emails, which is a very bizarre thing to do. So I actually I started to adopt some of the mindset of some of my peers at my last place, where I would start skipping kind of my no meetings blocks and just working through them. And actually, it made me unhappy. And that unhappiness also gave me a bad perspective on kind of just the work that I was doing. It didn't allow me to reflect on the times that I was able to complete things and do wonderful things with my group. I just kind of was like, what's the next problem? I'm going to work through this. Now, reflection is actually a pretty interesting word here as well, because I think that's actually what breaks give you the time to do. You get into these loops of thought, and then you're able to kind of like pull yourself out of them when you take a break and just look back at that process and say, like, was that good? And if it was, you jump back into it. If it wasn't, like, figure out what's wrong. And we actually do have techniques like this already. Who here has used the rubber ducky technique? So only a few of you. It's interesting. So I'll tell you about what the rubber ducky technique. Rubber ducky technique is essentially, you have this inanimate object. Usually it's a rubber ducky or some type of thing that has a face. And you put it on your desk. And then when you run into a big problem, you essentially will ask this inanimate object the problem. And actually, the craziest thing is that a lot of times it will give you a little bit of clarity, and either you'll be able to see the problem in a new light, or you'll be able to maybe even fix the problem. And I think what's actually happening here is that you're jumping out of the flow of your kind of the flow that you're in, the same train of thought, and you're able to throw this problem to another side of your brain, which actually processes language, and then be able to like look at this thing and verbalize it, which actually is another part of your brain. And so you kind of like are jumping out of that flow and are able to look at the problem more clearly by verbalizing it to this rubber ducky. There's been many times where I've used this technique and actually been amazed at like just how well it works. And I would encourage you to try it out. There's also another good analogy. So I just watched a talk by this famous Buddhist monk called Mingzhou Rinpoche. And he was talking about emotions and meditation, but I think it actually works really well with flow and reflection or taking a break. So essentially when you're in the flow of programming, you are kind of in the middle of a river. It's great, you're moving fast, you're going down the river, but then you run into problems. Maybe that's legacy code or something like that. And it gets a little bumpy. And actually sometimes it can get so bumpy that it can turn into a waterfall. Now, being in a river, a waterfall is, coming up on a waterfall, that's a terrifying thing, and that can do many things to your psyche. But the act of taking a break is like going onto the shore and looking at the river and being able to observe what is going on. And, there's been countless times where I've looked back at like a crazy bug that, that may have caused us to not deploy to production or something. And looking back at that and saying, oh, well, we fixed it, and look at this elegant solution. This is so beautiful. It's because when you step back from a waterfall, it's a beautiful thing. Now, I work on stuff. Some of you get it, because you've done it. I work at stuff at home, and I work on contract work, and I wanted to figure out a way that I can promote a healthy lifestyle for myself without actually just running into the same problems that I ran into while at work. So I wanted to figure out a way that I can actually eject from the flow. And now you might be thinking, and rightfully so, that there already is techniques for this. A Pomodoro. Pomodoro is where you set a little timer, the timer goes off, you have this checklist that you're going through, but the Pomodoro didn't really work for me, and it was only a few small problems that I ran into with the Pomodoro. And tell you the truth, if you're using the Pomodoro and it works for you, do it. That's one thing I want to encourage is like, if you find something that works for you, just stick with it and keep doing it. But the issues that I had was that a lot of it's like very based off of static timeframes, and you can actually adjust those timeframes over time. But just like during the day, the timeframes are very static. And it's also super focused on being the most productive human being. And I kind of don't have the life goals of being super productive. I want to be a happy person more than anything. So that was it wasn't too bad of a thing, because productivity can help with your happiness, but I wanted something that focused on happiness. So if I was into a flow that was really bad, I'd be able to, instead of jumping out and having to do a checklist or check back in, I would actually, do an activity that made me a little bit happier. Now my solutions is really just the inverse, having relative timeframes, and this could be based off of the activity that you're doing, being able to track activity and say like, oh, well, I'm really active right now. So that means that like I'm in a state of flow that, isn't necessarily bad, but I should probably jump out of this in some time. And then also I wanted to focus on happiness. Now this is actually even trickier because what is happiness, right? But one thing I've learned through years of meditation is that kind of just being able to observe the things that we do on a day-to-day and being able to get in touch with yourself a little bit is a way to kind of put different perspectives on things and to see normal things or to see the activities that you do in a different light, that sometimes you can look at it in a positive light. So essentially I wanted to change this to something that's more like a breathing exercise. Now, I looked for something out there, and I think it's pretty niche. I can't say that like everybody's probably looking for the same thing I am. But being an engineer, and we get this amazing opportunity to take things that are in the back of our head, things that we're like, oh, this is really cool. Like, is there anything out there? And try to find it. And if we don't find it, we actually have the opportunity to build it. So I decided that I was going to build something. And these are a couple of decisions that I made. I decided to build it on the web platform. I am a web engineer, just like I would assume probably half of you are as well. And I spend a lot of time in my browser. So I actually built it in a Chrome extension. And I wanted to inject it into a point that I think is probably one of the worst behaviors that I have on a web browser, which is opening up new tabs. I just like will open up a ton of them, and I feel like it's just such a bad behavior that I have. So I wanted to inject it into a new tab page. And being from coming from a meditation company, I was like, oh, I should use meditation. And I was like, but you know what? Meditation actually is a pretty heavy thing to do, even if it is like 2 to 3 minute sessions. Doing it, every hour and a half, every 3 hours, that can be a little bit heavy of a practice. I mean, just getting myself to do 5 minutes a day is sometimes difficult. Doing it multiple times a day would be very, very difficult. So I actually looked to meditation's little brother, mindfulness, and just kind of decided to do a breathing exercise, because breathing exercises are very light touch. And I actually didn't want to make it a game, but it ended up becoming sort of like a game, because the more you actually start to interact, the application interacts with the activity that a user is doing, the more it starts to become more game-like. Like if you're able to do something to reset all your activity, or if your activity now starts to build up and creates this kind of like this application, like it starts to behave more like a game. And it was very interesting. And how does everybody feel right now? Do you guys need to take a break? I mean, I'm kind of going through a cycle right now. So this is going to be a breathing exercise. It's a pranayama breathing. So it just slows down a little bit, and it's only going to be 5 breaths. So bear with me. So it's simple, very small, very small. And something like that, it gives you time to reflect, and you might be thinking, what the hell am I doing listening to this talk right now? But it's also, a great way to kind of just like pull yourself out of the flow and just like think about it. And with something that lightweight, like you're not taking a break really, but you're also pulling yourself out of a flow that you're able to think about, what you're doing. So if you're like, oh, well, I was really getting this stuff done, I want to continue doing it, go for it. That was like, what, 5 seconds? No, it was a little bit longer than that. But essentially, if you're in a bad flow or you're like angry at something, maybe this is just giving that little bit of time will give you the ability to like think about it and be like, oh, maybe I should go walk around the block, or maybe I should go and talk to one of my coworkers or something like that. Take an extended break. So you could try this out. Getmujo.com is where you can find the link to download it. And actually, if you're interested to see my slides, or I actually did write a blog post about why I built Getmujo, which actually goes through a little bit more of my story. You can all find all those links there. But really, I want to encourage you, like, find what works for you. Find, the injection point, the lengths of the breaks, the type of breaks that work for you, because maybe what works for me doesn't work for you. But I think your mental health is the important thing, and finding what works for you is great. But most importantly, just don't get burned out. Thanks.